to the last Holloway reading of the spring. I'm Jorie Graham, co-curator this semester with Professor Charles Altieri, and we're very pleased to have Jorie Graham with us tonight for her reading, and graduate student Jennifer Reimer. We'll have a brief Q&A session after the reading, so think of your questions while you're listening, and we'll also be raffling off a free book, so I hope you had a chance to enter the drawing. I want to start by introducing Jennifer Reimer, who is a graduate student in ethnic studies and also a graduate of UCSF's MFA program in fiction. Her work has appeared in Commonweal, St. Ignatian Literary Review, and Denver Syntax, and she's the co-founder of Achoti Press, and which just published their first chapbook today. So ask her about it, she'll want to show it to you. Working primarily in the form of a prose poem, Jennifer Reimer's work is fretted with narrative traces. You say that you have been betrayed by stories, she accuses someone at the beginning of her collection, Dreams of Departure. And that accusation resonates throughout Reimer's work, which minutely examines the manner in which the stories we tell and the titles we give each other are themselves forms of treachery. Her work aims to reveal what ideas like story, poet, or partner cover over, leave out, cannot account for. Gaps, awkward circumstance, unexplained sentiment, recalcitrant observations, these are the raw materials of Reimer's art, and the resulting poems take the form of the examined life's remainders, pressed into the shape of story, moved forward by the logic of poetry. In her hands, the most quotidian activity takes on a strange air of purpose. Quote, as long as the house is clean, no one can judge our moral laxity, she argues in one scene, stressing the way careful domestic surfaces conceal anxieties, reactions are, like the crumbling tales of this work, desperately imbricated acts of preservation and interpretation. The small universe of a love relationship takes on an unusual urgency and clarity when she writes, the walls of our house are beating and we are not lost within them. The action of the poetry happens in the seemingly narrow confines of that place that cannot be left, the tight house of the mind, as it struggles to assign roles, poet, reader, hero, lover, construct ideologies, and ultimately to leave someone or something behind. But for Reimer, that leaving is the ultimate dream of departure. Each time the bags are packed and the parting words are spoken, we find that our nearness is permanent. Quote, the last great geographical expansion, she writes, left us shored against each other. The domestic romantic topography of these poems, Reimer gives us the marks of plot, characters, relationships, comings, goings, disasters, reconciliations, dialogue, but what emerges is a cluster of work that feels as though it were a languid novel that had been taken apart and carefully stitched back together. But this is a reconstruction that aims not to conceal the story in the manner of the needlessly obtuse poetics, but rather to reveal the lie inherent in recounting just the straight story. After all, Reimer points out, this is a story that takes place in darkness. Please welcome Jen Reimer.
Thank you, Hillary, for a very intelligent and generous introduction. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to be here tonight with Ms. Jorie Graham. This is the first reading that I participated in that my father actually recognized the name of the other poet that I'm reading with. All the more surprising because I didn't know that he knew American poetry had survived the death of T.S. Eliot. So I'm going to be reading from my collection, Dreams of Departure, and I would like to dedicate my reading tonight to the victims, survivors, and community at Virginia Tech, whose tragedy this week, I think, reminds us what a fragile privilege it is to be here in this room, sharing and celebrating poetry with our friends and colleagues. If we are to discuss a problem, we should start from reality and not from definitions. Take a bucket of water, for instance. Where is it to be raised if not from the ground? What was sudden, drying dirt, rain-buried seeds? No, you said, it was birds, an accident of nesting. There is absolutely no such thing as love or hatred without reason or cause. Every night you say we are too tired, rain breaking surfaces. We sleep on opposite sides, dreams of petaled light. A list of useful objects: stones, wood, bones, shells, things. A complex of things for understanding the structures of species. We watch the walls, where a spider conducts operations that resemble a weaver. These relations contain all that has disappeared into paint or air. As members of a working organism, we move without making noise, a power measured by its ghostly duration, now transparent, now immaterial. The things we place are not bound to us. We are the basis of all systems of plunder. You asked me to measure the distant roar of water from the stolen, a golden net for casting, an amber light for a remote sea. From the interior, the star line cuts us into various patterns. We cover corners with what was missing, a map of our countries. Magic markers tell us where we've been, and our small intersections are marked with flags: Boston, New York, Atlanta, San Francisco. You said, to this we shall shortly return. I said, what if we coexist between all or both? Memories are roped like a bridge. If we grew wings like birds, we wouldn't travel as such, a more infinite mode of arrival. The actual distance advances according to our own logic. No amount of memory consolidates murderous symbolism. We are a number of homelands, briefly, splitting. It has been raining for so long that the door will no longer shut. In claiming the legacy of intimacy, we can no longer tell what came in with the rain, what was once. Memories now discrete representations stored in a cabinet infested with ants. I have learned on my own to interpret their scratching as the process of empire. You say power is never so transparent that its analysis becomes unnecessary. Alone in the afternoon, I ruin floors with scrubbing. Presences and absences embedded in the wood are not natural. They're fashioned by ritual. Your absence creates a space for new conquests, where dust refuses. There is no ism in the world that transcends our scorn, just as there is no objective practice to transcend our experience of love. Many things have entered: a pool of rainwater, a line of ants. In our new hands, these old forms, remolded and infused with new content, also become something revolutionary in the service of the passionate. I think we are growing gills, breathing. Here we can shout at the top of our voices and have no need for veiled and roundabout expressions. And while they are destroyed, something can be constructed. Windows become whispers, and my tongue refuses to dissolve. You, an echolocation. In the middle of all this architecture, you are leaving. I will measure what you leave behind by packing suitcases. Not everything will be recorded. Your leaving, for instance, goes unremarked by air and dust, our weary household gods. This is what happens when you leave. I open a book. I make the bed. I wash your dishes. On the appointed day, I stay indoors. I'm at the window to answer my name, should you call it. I told you power should be visible and unverifiable, but that was not a permission, not a mask. Do not think I am not deprived. These constant departures leach from my skin the necessary motion of bodies mixed together. Once we enacted a part in the great review of the living and the dead. We were coming together, slowly. Who knows but we might have been something? I sit with an open book. I am covered in alphabets, and you have just left. You are not here, but the gate trembles so that I think you must be. We are deluded, you said, unalterable as if haunted by ghosts. Rattling around these empty walls, our diaspora does not appear on the surfaces. They are traces.
We perform our small exorcisms in the process of lovemaking. Our dead indicate how the terrain has been structured, where there is no straight line. Listen, they are whispering. The violence of life articulates. They became what they were while we were in the kitchen. Now, turn the text upside down. Don't tell me about your drums in the forest. The walls of our house are beating, and we are not lost within them. An open atlas reminds us of our condition of rootlessness. We bend pages toward memories and dreams, all the beautiful places that cannot be ruined. We trace the gold embossing and understand why nostalgia holds such charm. Perhaps our longing is a mode of travel, because the forces of disorder relentlessly pursue stable order. I have not tried to rewrite our assembled codes and artifacts. I cannot tell all possible stories that wait to be salvaged from the debris. Whose new world is this, where green foliage grows between the sheets of rotting books? Sunlight becomes a single and simple moment. Yes, there were doubts at times, just as there are degrees of humanity. I spread sunscreen on my limbs to invoke the memory of summer. How many dead ants are equivalent to one human life? Our history has turned this rhetoric into a source of consolation. My small murders are not discussed at the dinner table. What explains the greater frequency of certain silences except words? Words are not concepts, concepts are not words. Between the two are layers of love. No ready-made category for the suspension of judgment. We watch the rain. What evaporates into the fold? What pale salts? Sadly, the presence of the past upon our present means that these difficulties have not been resolved to anyone's satisfaction, not to the difficult position of the poet, bearing a resigned witness to it. That knowledge creates a discomforting complicity that you and I swat at like flies. As we sleep, we cultivate cosmopolitan disloyalty and practice systematic estrangement. When we wake, dead flies have fallen onto the bed. The sunlight reminds us of joining. I'm tidying up and you're playing music so that no one remembers last night's evacuation. What takes decoding are processes of alignment, how bodies imagine, describe, and comprehend each other. Over time, our stories become contradictory, a work of art with nowhere to go. Here, an effective reading begins to get out of hand. Plot lines encircle us until we are bound to our intersections. What happens are a series of experiments and tactical interventions in longing. You say there's been too much in the same place at the same time. It's not futile to emphasize the daring adventure that has left us breathless for 10 years. We've already encountered the central role of discourse in camouflaging intent, and it's too early to say whether these processes will change. In the meantime, we approach mythology with a certain apprehension. Dreams of corridors are our labyrinths of regret. We've entered a new state of nearness. What unites movement must be breath. We've transformed the specter that haunted the world, which used to be vast, into intimate exhalations. We are laughing. Who does danger paralyze? The last great geographical expansion left us shored against each other. The terms of this division are final. We are the first historical system with an infinite life, and the results are already dear. A story not of definitions, but of social choices, like this. What we've been isn't as important as what we're making. Throw out the birth certificates and the old photos. In the living room, we are binding. In our season of hurricanes, time is a unifying coordinate. What strikes water and wind are trees and glass, uneven relations of form or space. We are outside where visible damage has altered the terms of trade for our affections. I place my body over holes where roots. You say such protection must be deeply institutionalized. We argue over rice, the best symbol of love, breadfruit, starfruit, carambola, guava. I want to love in all the paradise words, to uncouple the dollar from gold and sunburn. You mention the growing incidence of takeovers, hostile or maybe not, but there can be no shelter where green bananas float to sea like corpses down a river of undrunk milk. There was once a great movement of love. Words unwrapped themselves from silence. We made ourselves poets. But I will not be a prisoner of history in a world that is trying to disappear. Not here, but somewhere beyond the objective world of fields and banana trees. You are coming closer to being a real human being. We have partial hints, indications left on 2 glasses that we live in a world of commodities and representations. What is seen through the glass can become a protective attachment. On the other side, we disappear into stories, where what is wayward and frightening compels us to look closer. Nothing single and pure. All energies poured into what evaporates into glass. I am watching you through smudges. I am watching you swirling in the bottom of a glass sitting on a table. We are not yet at the stage when we can talk about history without needlessly invoking the future. Ghosts of haunted walls and misread stories claw at the surface beneath your passionate rhetoric. Just for a moment, let us return to where things stay unchanged, like guardians of a magic totality. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And now one of our graduate students from the English department, Megan Pugh, is going to introduce Jorie Graham.
Jen, that was lovely. I'm honored to introduce Jorie Graham, and also I'm just really excited to get to hear her read. I've been looking forward to tonight for months, I guess, since the Holloway announced its lineup. But Jorie Graham barely requires an introduction. I think as the crowd in this room makes clear, her poetry is widely read, widely studied, and widely admired. Graham won the Pulitzer Prize in 1996 for The Dream of the Unified Field, which contains selections from her first 5 books. She has served as a chancellor for the Academy of American Poets and has received a MacArthur Fellowship. After years of teaching at the Iowa Writers' Workshop, Graham became the Boylston Professor of Rhetoric and Oratory at Harvard, and she's the first woman to do so. She has published over 10 books of poetry, including The Errancy, Swarm, Never, and most recently, Overlord, which takes its title from the Allies' code name for the D-Day invasion. But Overlord also refers to some sort of higher organizing power that Graham insistently but uncertainly addresses. I don't know where to start, begins Praying, attempt of May 9th, 03, one of a series of poems about crises in faith, about longing for a sign from something bigger than we are. You will have noted that I cannot say your plan, Graham writes, and yet she implores, I am your instrument if you would only use me. But if there is no plan and no absolute, how can we ensure that we act in the right way and learn to care for each other? In a later praying poem, attempt of June 14th, 03, Graham writes, keep us in the telling, I say, face to the floor. Keep us in the story. Do not force us back into the hell of action. We only know how to kill. Graham's earliest work seems more hopeful about the ability of narrative to provide what Frost famously called a temporary stay against confusion. In Over and Over Stitch, a poem from her first book, Hybrids of Plants and Ghosts, she writes, there are moments in our lives which, threaded, give us heaven. By the poem's poignant end, the stitches mark a stillness we can't keep. But Graham has come to resist even such brief closure, what she calls the silky swerve into shapeliness. Her poetry takes confusion as a kind of productive force. Instead of settling for a singular perspective, She now threads moments from our lives together with moments from myth and history. Her work addresses both the knowledge we get from individual embodiment and the Western philosophical tradition, prompting difficult questions whose answers lie at the boundaries of experience. We have a sense when reading that we too are searching after the invisible, longing for something that lies just outside or surges underneath. But there's another problem of dealing with real people in this world. How can we memorialize the dead, comfort the young, feed the hungry? Language, Graham shows us, provides tenuous solace. And without a listener, words risk becoming mirrors, turning us back on ourselves when we're desperate for communication. So Graham frequently addresses us directly, recalling the old convention of speaking to a dear reader. Harkening back to the language of sensibility, she writes in Overlord of being consumed with fellow feeling. But unlike sentimental narrators who tell their audiences how to respond, Graham wants to connect, not prescribe. So she leaves blanks in some of her poems, and in Never, she writes, "One wishes so one could be interrupted." As an exchange between persons, or between persons and things, poetry can be a way of negotiating difference, of contemplating without possessing. As Graham puts it in Materialism, we have to regain the moral pleasure of experiencing the distance between subject and object. Poetry, and poetry readings like this one tonight, facilitate such moral pleasures. We listen to a poem. Parts of it may ensnare us, parts may go past us, and we can't hold it in all at once, but we consider it and we try to understand. Graham's introduction to the 1990 edition of Best American Poetry includes a fine description of attending a reading. It's hard to feel that we can grasp, let alone possess, a paradox, an ambiguity, and even an image. And so the poem, Graham writes, allows the soul-forging pleasures of thinking to prevail over the acquisition of information called knowing. She continues, "We discover, in the process, that we can trust a deeper current of our sensibility." Graham's work pulls this current to the surface, and its difficulty, its mystery, and its beauty. Please join me in welcoming Jorie Graham.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for quoting from all the poems I don't have to read now. Skip right to the new work. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. I'm going to read two poems from the book that just described, Overlord. One of the praying attempts, and one of the poems spoken from the perspective of a community of soldiers. The book, as was indicated, takes its title from the Allied invasion of Normandy. It raised a great many issues for me. First of all, I began to live in a part of Normandy 6 years ago that is basically in the area called D+18 Hours, which means that it is a part of the fields of Hedgerows, reached in the first 18 hours after the landing on Omaha Beach. The military designates up to the first 18 days. Every piece of geography by that form of counting. It's very unnerving to live in fields that are that saturated with war. Even more unnerving when you realize that Omaha Beach is the same beach that William the Conqueror left from to cross over in 1066 in the Norman invasion of England, and therefore that his DNA in some respect crosses the channel in 1944 and comes back. Both its descendants in the United States and its British confrères and the Canadians. It's also the beach on which pretty much one field off from the beach where the 100 Years' War ended. It's the beach on which Maud Gonne lived with Yeats. And because the beach itself is not Omaha Beach, it is the beach that connects Colville and Vierville and Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, and where he famously read her the first draft of Easter 1916, which she, of course, detested. And it's hard to walk on that beach without, sort of almost, since it's a very windy beach, without imagining his piece of paper rattling in the air as he tried to read this draft to this wonderfully difficult woman. It's a beach where Beckett lived for a while. It's just a few kilometers away from the forest of Cerizay, where the very first arrival of Joseph Arimathea's bringing of the Holy Grail is recorded in Europe. It then, of course, crosses the Channel and becomes English. That prompted the very first attempts of the medium that became photography to experiment with the very early forms of vers cliché, to capture I find it very interesting, the first attempts of photography were attempts to capture what is invisible, not what is visible, and they were exposed to those forests in order to capture images of the Merlinian folk. Manet lived there, Monet painted there. Many wars were fought there. It is a ground so saturated with blood, and all of Europe is so saturated with blood that it is in a kind of post-war era that doesn't quite resemble the adolescent United States' understanding of what war is. So it's extremely interesting. I'm only describing the unbelievable overdetermination of this place to make you sort of feel how laden the soil is. And these poems were written really out of an attempt to deal with living in such a, I grew up in Rome. It wasn't like I hadn't lived in a historically laden environment, but this was so laden with war, so many cemeteries, so many different wars, so much blood in the ground, and so much palpable feeling of that blood that it was came up against other issues for me that became very dominant, very complicated attempt to try to understand what a, quote, just war is, which, of course, is usually invoked most easily about that particular battle and that particular intervention in that particular war. If we're going to have a just war, it's not just, it's going to be the one exemplified by the very small portion of it fought at Omaha by the Allied forces. So I wrote this while living there and in an 11th century house, and trying to be, as any American is under the circumstances, someone who uncomprehendingly was faced with the first and second, primarily the second war in Iraq. So the praying attempts, of which I'm going to read one, were not poems that I expected to make into poems. Actually, they were moments of, and they're not, and especially religious moments. I don't know what to call what happens when one gets on one's hands and knees in the dark, in the middle of the night, unable to bear what is happening any longer. And I just decided to try to record everything I could think during those particular crazed sessions. I didn't expect to get poems out of them. I only managed to get 6, because if you write in the dark, chances are you're going to write the same line over and over again on top of the... So I managed to self-erase quite frequently. I had a little agreement with myself that I would quit writing as soon as the first evidence of light occurred in the room. I realized afterwards that I was therefore dealing with a kind of an attempted enunciation, or a request for an enunciatory experience. But I called them praying and then attempt with the date. So I'm going to read one of them. This one ends with a line that you will recognize, I think, from the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Agamemnon. I don't have to explain to you who Agamemnon is. But Agamemnon and Mycenae appear, and obviously that's what's nice about being here. I don't have to explain to you. Agamemnon is, although you'd be surprised. I did want to say that I feel also grateful to be here under the pressures of this unfolding, I think only beginning to unfold, suicide, murder that took place at Virginia Tech. I find it very hard not to also think of the boy going insane and committing this act as someone to whom my consciousness reaches out. I can't imagine the grief of his particular mother, who also lost a son to madness and then to suicide, and who has the murders of all these other children on her conscience. And so it's hard for me to not also think about the 190 people that happened to have been killed in Baghdad on the same day, and of the people that our children are being asked to kill. Numbers such as 30 are quite small in Baghdad on a given day, or anywhere in Iraq or in Afghanistan, or anywhere where we are sending our 18-year-olds to commit acts of murder that they cannot but undertake, because they have, for the most part, been asked to join the military in order to pay for the luxury of an education. There are people, obviously, who have volunteered, but a great, great many of the people in the armed forces are young people who are paid $37,500, which goes to their family, which is an enormous amount of money, in order to be able to hope to attend school when they come home. And all of that sort of gets packed into this event of the last few days. And it seems to me a great honor to be in an institution that people would go to a place like Iraq in order to be able to come back and attend. Praying attempt of June 14. This morning before dawn, no stars, I try again. I want to be saved, but from what? Researchers in California have discovered a broken heart causes as much distress in the pain center of the brain as physical injury. The news was outside the door on the landing. I squatted to it, then came back in. Resume my position, knees tight, face pressed. There seems to be a canyon, no light in it, yet it's there, but then nothing. Waste comes in. I know they are burying our waste, that it will last hundreds of millions of years in the mountain, that they are trying to cover it with signs they do not know how to develop in a language that will still communicate in that far future, saying, don't open this, this is lethal beyond measure, back away, go away, close the lid, close the door. The canyons where my face lies full weight on the platter of my hands have ridges and go forward only to the buried waste. If there is beauty growing on those flanks, beauty in detail, furred underside of small desert leaves comes to mind, but only as idea. The sage twiggy stuff with its blue flowers, the succulent floor plants that rise, the hundreds of crossing mucus tracks on the walls where the snails have been guiding the first light down their slick avenues to some core, all of it just in mind, not on my closed face, trying so hard to let the thing that can save us in. If there is beauty, it is missing in its manyness, is only there in form. I am trying to be honest. I am not relying on chance anymore. I am trying to take matters into my own hands. Hand, heart, head, brain, pain, center, sleep, memory. I try to remember. Something that was once is not graspable from here. Here is all here, is the problem. Have tucked the body away. Am all alone on this floor, in a city in America, to make a sacrifice. Of what? Save my beloveds. Save my child. Save her right now. Destroy this carpeting, these windows, the walls. Take the whole of what is wrong in payment from us. Let me fall through the air. Save the will to live. Save the constituent part of the human. No, what is constituent? Oh, save my child, my only child. The more I press down onto the rug, the more we move up the canyon. In my cine, we moved up this canyon too. Up through the city to the throne room at the top. The columns still standing. The view of 2 oceans and over 2 ranges, where the king and his retinue are receiving the news. Here, the poet ushered in to sing of what has happened. Right here, on this floor, the voice telling its long story. Long, slow, in detail. All of them waiting, listening for the terrible outcome, in detail, the opening of the singer at the throat, the still bodies of the listeners, high on this outpost, 3,000 years ago, the house of Agamemnon, the opening of the future, there, right through the open mouth of the singer, what happened, what is to come, and the stillness surrounding them when it is done, the song, and the singer still, and the chalices empty. Dawn about to open it all up again. Dawn about to move it from inside the mind back out. Light almost visible on the far hills. Oh, who will hear this? When it comes, it will be time only for action. Keep us in the telling, I say, faced the floor. Keep us in the story. Do not force us back into the hell of action. We only know how to kill. Once we stop singing, we only know how to get up and stride out of the room and begin to choose. This from that, this from that, this from that. And the pain sliding into the folds of the brain and lodging. Look, the steps move us up through the dark. I can hear them even though I can't see them. We are moving further up. This, that, and the pain, sliding all along, sliding into the fine crevices on the side walls of this brain we are traveling up, and the pain lodging, and the pain finding the spot of unforgetting, as in, here I am, here I am. Because this is a relatively short reading, I'm just going to read another poem from this book. It's one of a series of poems spoken, titled Spoken from the Hedgerows. As with the planning of any war, the war planned by the Allied forces in England, much trained on hedgerows built for sheep. The hedgerows in Normandy hold in bulls, so there was no way to get across the hedgerows. Many men died. The life expectancy of the first 15 minutes was 0. After that, life expectancy of the first hour was about 8 seconds. It was an enormous slaughter, but the greatest slaughter after the beach was that took place amongst the hedgerows, because the soldiers were given a small instrument called a cricket that was a little dime store toy that they were supposed to use to identify themselves to their comrades on either side of these very large, very dark hedgerows. And of course it sounded exactly like a gun cocking, so they walked right into their death for the most part. This is just a poem which is actually, as I think you'll be able to tell, about something else as well. Something about the way in which the nature of the language in it begins to build something completely other, an alternate history. I was Floyd West, 1st Division. I was born in Portia, Arkansas, February 6, 1919. We went through Reykjavik, Iceland, through the North Atlantic, through the wolf packs. That was 1942. I was Don Whitsitt. I flew a B-26 medium bomber number 131657 called the Mississippi Mudcat. I was a member of the 387th Bomb Squad and then later the 559th Bomb Squadron. Picked up the Mudcat in Mount Clemens, Michigan, flew over our whole group, 4 squadrons, 16 planes each, from Hunter Field at Savannah, Georgia, then to Langley Field at Norfolk, Virginia, from there to Grenier Field at Manchester, New Hampshire. In each place stayed a day or two. From Grenier went on to port of embarkation, which was Presqu'Isle, Maine, then started across, first to Goose Bay, Labrador, then to Bluey, West One, Greenland, then over the Cap to Mixfield, Iceland, made landfall at Stornoway, Scotland. From there down to Prestwick, North London. Finally, Station 162 at Chipping, Ongar. My name was Dan, 392nd Squadron of the 367th Fighter Group. March 21, boarded the Duchess of Bedford in New York, an old English freighter ship which had been converted to bring over the load of German prisoners whom we replaced. Going back to England, slept below decks in hammocks. April 3rd, arrived in Scotland. Following a beautiful trip through the country, arrived at Stony Cross, 10 miles from the Channel. It was a beautiful moonlit night. I was known as Bob. I was in D Company. My number was 203-64227. I was born February 3, 1925, Bristol, Tennessee. We embarked on the HMS Queen Mary, stripped, painted dull gray, hammocks installed with troops sleeping in shifts. The Queen was capable of making 28 knots and therefore traveled unescorted, since it could outrun any sub. Walter, given name, 29th Division. We crossed on the Queen Mary. The swimming pool was covered over. That's where most of us slept. My name was Alan Anderson, 467th Anti-Aircraft Artillery. I was given birth November 1, 1917, Winchester, Wisconsin. They took us to Fort Dix for England. We took the northern route in the extreme rough sea of January. It was thought this would confuse the German subs. It didn't exactly work that way. A convoy ahead of us by a few days was hit. Many ships sank. I saw the bodies of so many sailors and soldiers floating by us with all the other debris and ice on the water. The name given me was John, born September 13, 24 in Chattanooga, but raised in Jacksonville. I was a person, graduated high school in 42, crossed over on the Ile-de-France, a 5-decker, 10,000 on board. They loaded over 20 on the Queen Mary. There on the other side of the pier, my name was Ralph, second-class pharmacist's mate. July 4th, received orders to Norfolk. There's no describing crossing the Atlantic in winter. We couldn't stay in our bunks without being strapped in and fastened to metal pipes on each side. We had 1 meal a day. My name, Robert, was put to me in Atchison, Kansas, United States, August 15, 1916, year of the Lord. We used to figure on there in the 149th Engineer Combat Battalion, which arrived Liverpool, England, January 8, 1944. It rained every day. From there we were taken to the town of Payton. The authorities would go down the road and the truck would stop and they'd say, "All right, 3 of you out here." And they'd march you to a house and say to the owner, "All right, these are your Americans. They are going to be staying with you." I'm going to read 2 new poems. I'll see how long they take. I might be able to read 3, but a lot of these poems are involved with the sensation of what it is to take possession of the visible world, as well as many other things, but I say that because that might be more apparent on a second reading of this poem. I'm sorry, I'm not like excessively thirsty. I have problems swallowing, the physical problem, so I have to keep drinking water. Guantanamo. Waning moon, rising now. Creek it goes, deep over the exhausted continents. I wonder, says my fullness. Nobody, nobody, says the room in which I lie very still in the darkness watching. Your heart, says the moon, waning and rising further. Where is it? Your keep, your eyes, your trigger finger, your spine, your reasoning. Also better to refuse touch, keep distance, let the blood run out of you and the white stars gnaw you, and the thorn which is so white outside in the field, and the sand which is sheetening on the long beach, and the soldiers readying, the upglance swift where the key words of prayer before capture are uttered. A shiver which has no hate but is not love, is neutral, yes, unblooded, as where, for instance, a bud near where a hand is unlocking a security catch calls out, and it is an instance of the nobody there, and the sound of water darkens, and the wind moves the grasses, and without a cry the cold flows like a watchdog's eyes, the watchdog keeping his eyes out for difference, only difference, and acts being committed in your name, and your captives arriving at your detention center, there in your eyes, the lockup, deep in your pupil, the softening up, you paying all your attention out, your eyes, your cell, your keep, your hold. After all, it is yours, yes, what you have taken in. Grasp it. Grasp this. There is no law. You are not open to prosecution. Look all you'd like, it will squirm for you. There, in this rising light, protected from consequence, making you a ghost, without a cry. Without a cry, the evening turns to night. Words, it seemed, were everything, and then the legal team will declare them exempt. Exemptions for lake water drying, for the murder of the seas, for the slaves in their waters, not of our species. Exemption named go forth, mix blood, fill your register, take of flesh, set fire, posit equator, conceal origin, say you are all forgiven, say these are only counter-resistant coercive interrogation techniques, as in, give me your name, give it, I will take it, I will reclassify it, I will withhold you from you, just like that, for a little while. It won't hurt much. Think of a garden. Take your mind off things. Think sea, wind, thunder, root. Think tree that will hold you up. Imagine it holding you up. Choose to be who you are. Quick, choose it. That will help. The moon is colder than you think. It is full of nothing like this stillness of ours. We are trying not to be noticed. We are in stillness as if it were an other life we could slip into. In our skins we dazzle with non-existence. It is a trick, of course, but sometimes it works. If it doesn't, we will be found. We will be made to scream and crawl. We will long to be forgiven. It doesn't matter for what, there are no facts. Moon. Who will write the final poem? Your veil is flying. Its uselessness makes us feel there is still time. It is about 2 now. You are asking me to lose myself. In this overflowing of my eye, I do. Futures. Midwinter. Dead of. I own you, says my mind. Own what? Own whom? I look up. Own the looking at us, say the cuttlefish branchings, lichen black, moist. Also the seeing, which wants to feel more than it sees. Also in the glance, the feeling of owning, accordioning out and up, sea fanning. And there is cloud on blue ground up there, and wind which the eye loves so deeply it would spill itself out to pay for it. And the push of owning is thrilling, is spring before it is, that swelling, that imagined fragrance as one bends to it, before the thing is close enough, wide-eyed leaning, although none of this can make you happy, because looking up the sky makes you hear it. You know why we have come to this, it blues. You know the trouble at the heart, blue, blue, what pandemonium, blur of spears, roots, cries, leaves, master and slave, the crop destroyed, water everywhere not drinkable, and radioactive waste in it, and human bodily waste. And what, says the eye-thinking heart, is the last color seen, the last word heard? Someone left behind, then no behind. Is there a skin of the I own which can be scoured from inside the glance? No, cannot. And always someone walking by whistling a little tune. That's life, he says, smiling. There, that was life. And the heart branches with its wild arteries. I own myself. I own my leaving. The falcon watching from the tree. I shall torch the crop that no one else have it, whispers the air. Someone swinging from a rope, his rope, the eye throbbing, day a noose seeking a neck, the fire spidery but fast, and the idea of friends, what was that? And the day in winter your lower back started acting up again, and they pluck out the eyes at the end for food. And don't forget the meeting at 6, your child's teacher wishes to speak to you about his future. And if there is no food and the rain is everywhere switching on as expected, and you try to think of music and the blue of Giotto, and if they have to eat the arms, he will feel no pain at least. And there is a sequence in which feeding takes place. The body is owned by the hungry, and one is waiting one's turn. One wants to own one's turn. And standing there, don't do it now, but you might remember kisses. How you kissed his arm in the sun and tasted the sun. And this is your address now, your home address. And the strings are cut, no one looks up any longer, or out. No. And one day a swan appeared out of nowhere on the drying river. It was sick, but it floated, and the eye felt the pain of rising to take it in. I own you, said the old feeling. I want to begin counting again. I will count what is mine. It is moving quickly now. I will begin this message, I feel the smile put up my hand to be sure. Yes, on my lips, the yes. I touch it again. I begin counting. I say 1 to the swan. 1. Do not be angry with me, O mine God. I have begun the action of beauty again. On the burning river I have started the catalogue. Your world. I, your speck, tremble, remembering money, its dry touch, sweet, strange smell. It's a long time, the smell of it like lily of the valley, sometimes, and pond water, and how one could bend down close to it and drink. Thank you. I have been told you want to ask me some questions. I don't have many answers, but I will try to.
talk about sort of your fantasies of what the sound is doing, if that makes any sense to you. If not, it's fine.
Charlie, my fantasy of what the sound is doing is exactly what you described. I have no fantasies about what the sound is doing. I just hope very much that it sounds, my job is that it would sound on the page the way it sounds from the podium. It was not written to be read from a podium. It was written to be read from a page. If it doesn't sound like that when you read it, there's something wrong with it. I try to reconnect with the emotion I underwent during both. I mean, one does this in revision. One undergoes an emotion of a certain kind in composition, and one has to figure out how to remain in a condition as the reader of that poem in revision, where one can keep not only contact with the emotion that gives rise to the poem, but where one can complicate it, deepen it, take it to places where one had not intended to go, surprise oneself, be taken by more than surprise. As Don Justice once said to me in a conference which terrified me, "Damn it, Jorie, you have to learn to give in to the destructiveness of the subject." And of course I did not understand a word of what he meant. And I remember the very street corner about a year and a half later when it came to me what he meant. I remember the exact paving of the corner. I remember the tree there. I remember everything. When it occurred to me that what he meant was, if you're going to write poems, you have to put yourself in a position where what you encounter, what you undertake to engage, your subject will destroy any a priori intentions you might have for it when you go into the encounter called composition. And if it doesn't destroy your intentions for it, then it's not even doesn't have a prayer of even beginning to be a poem. You have to, encounter something that, at least in my experience, and I know this is a very minority view at this point, that can change you. I wouldn't do this if I wasn't taken by surprise and given back aspects of experience that I could not have by any other means than by undertaking the technique that we call the writing of a poem. I do not write poems to report experiences that I've had in life. I write poems to have experiences that I can only have by undergoing the music, the sense of line, the rhythm, the really complicated set of prosodical nightmares I create for myself in order to have an experience which is not the one that I brought to the page. So what do I hope the music? I hope the music is going to, as I use the music, as I summon the music, as I deploy the music, as the music messes with me, as I mess with it in composition, and I revise so much that I'm reading from pages that have so many marks on them. I'm amazed I got through them. I hope that music will instruct me, will alter me, will take me to some place that I didn't know about, and will get me to the next poem. So that's my fantasy about the music. It's that it's going to illuminate me better than light. Yes, I use the word experience. Whoa, I'm at Berkeley and I got to say the word experience. I feel really proud of myself. Yes.
Do you destroy old drafts?
Do I destroy old drafts? Are you kidding?
And if you don't, what do you think of them being available to people after?
You mean like the nightmare that was inflicted upon Elizabeth Bishop? There are certain poets who make it very clear by their very procedures, all through their writing life, that their drafts are going to be, this is the second part of the question, answer. They're going to be available. Williams is all drafts. He has no problem with drafts. A poet like Elizabeth Bishop is a poet who is not a poet who freed her drafts. She was an obsessive reviser, and she knew what a finished poem was. It is one thing to publish in a variorum edition or a large edition of her work in the index, poems that were rejected by Elizabeth Bishop. It's another thing to present them as if they are a book of her poems. And so I have a problem with that. That aside, I keep every single draft because I have to make sure I don't lose something en route. So I look at the first draft always when I think I'm approaching a final draft. I go back to look precisely because of what Charlie was asking me. I mean, I go back to see what music I gave up, because one of the things you start doing in revision is you start activating that part of your sensibility that admires and is soothed by and is attracted to finish, to symmetry, to a sense of controlling, organizing pleasures that the conceptual intellect, when it comes to work on a piece of music and language, wishes to experience. So you begin to, in effect, bring a different sensibility to bear on the poem. I mean, it is, the original draft, you know it by heart. It's, if you want to keep working on it, it kind of bores you. So you're going to start continuing to mess with it. What does that messing with it awaken in you? Well, chances are parts of your sensibility that are very much invited to control and to, often, it seems to me, protect you from the poem itself by the very sensation of the desire to make it a cleaner, swifter, more efficiently beautiful and musical machine. There's a kind of music that you write in a rough draft, and then there's a kind of music that you arrive at in a final draft, and they are an acute negotiation with each other. And in between, in my experience, there's some really flat music that you write when you just, keep trying to finish the thing and keep trying to shut it down. So I have never written a poem that I have not in some way revised at the very last minute by going back to the first draft and finding something that I'd lost that was always musical. It's very rarely a piece of diction, or a piece of thinking, or a statement or an image. You don't lose that because you learn to read that. You learn to know what that is. But you don't know the current running through the wire at what rate of speed. As Frost says, you have to achieve a certain air speed to carry freight. And you can collapse the whole poem by just I can't, even in revision, I have to go to alter something in line 22. I have to constantly read down to line 22 in every moment to make sure that in terms of acceleration, dilation, what is being asked to carry what. I guess that's why I get to have a title called Boylston Professor of Oratory and Rhetoric. I'm really into rhetoric. Really into syntax. I mean, for me, the poem, these new poems are an experience that I can't transmit to you in reading them, but they're having an active negotiation right now for me, keeping me incredibly excited between the ampersand and the word and. So I'm sure you heard a lot of ands in the poem, but they're very different ands, the ampersand and the A and D, and these two musical components that are, at work in this poem, keeping me in trouble. I know this is a phrase from which a title of an infamous anthology has been taken, but it is still a very great phrase when Frost says, "What are the ideals of form for except to get us into legitimate danger that we may be legitimately rescued?" And I write poems to get myself into places I don't know how to get out of. I discard a lot of poems that way, but every now and then, at least for me, I get to a place where I can let go of a poem. So I keep everything. Besides, they might be worth money. And I might need to, retire someday. It'll probably never happen, but I had to borrow against everything, so I don't know when. But the drafts might be my only salvation. Yes, there's a question over here somewhere. I saw a hand. Oh. No. Yes. Hi.
The last poem you read, I Own You, said the old feeling. And I just wondered if you might talk about that line or the philosophical or personal implications of it. It's been rolling around in revision for a while.
What's your name?
Valentina.
Valentina? I don't have the first idea what poems I'm working on mean in that way. I'm 1/3 of the way into a new book after a 4-year silence. I'm I am so grateful for these poems. I put them in the freezer at night so that if all technology fails and the house burns down, I still have them when I wake up in the morning. And the last thing I want to do is understand them in any way that would allow me to answer your question. When the book is done, I will be able to do that. But that's just, I have to completely drown out that part of my brain in order to write this book. So I'm sorry. I know that I'm sitting at a podium here and I'm supposed to have answers of that kind, but I don't even want to hear the question. That's why I was so loath to take questions. Yes?
How do you know when a poem is done?
You don't. To paraphrase a wonderful answer that Berriman gave Merwin when he asked a slightly different question, how do you know when a poem is any good? He said, you don't know, you die without knowing. If you have to know, don't write. And the knowing part of the whole process, you don't know. It's a cliche to say that poems are never finished, only abandoned. You just get them to a point where there's nothing else you can do to make them any better. And one of the ways that I do that is I have a publisher who demands a book from time to time. So then I get completely hysterical about seeing them in print, and I go through them again. But I don't know. I don't know that anything I've ever written is finished. I'm being honest with you. I really don't.
To rephrase that question, I'd say, how do you know when a poem is publishable? But
Well, I mean, I like the process of publication only because when the galleys arrive, everything looks dreadful. So sometimes I've even, with the London Review, I have this very sweet relationship because they're going to be publishing a lot of this new book. But what I said to them is, do you mind just putting them in galleys and sending them to me? Because as soon as I see them in galleys, I see so many mistakes and everything looks terrible. And it really helped me revise if I see that they're going to be public. So they're sending them to me in galleys so that the horror of it, helps me. It's very sweet of them. It's very kind. I'm answering you very honestly. I mean, I could be, yes, go ahead. Yes, what are the ideals of form for except to get us into legitimate danger that we may be legitimately rescued? He also said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, which is a version of what I was saying earlier. He also said, no tears for the writer, no tears for the reader. He also said a poem has to achieve sufficient air speed in order to carry freight, which is one of my favorite descriptions of what syntax, acceleration, and, all of its incredible capacities can do. I mean, these are exploded haiku. I'm sure those of you who know the haiku can tell that the way they begin with, almost all of them begin with a classic waning moon, full moon, one of the gestures of the haiku, and the attempt to keep a lyric afloat in a duration, which is of a different span than the one that we're accustomed to, for me, is intimately involved with attempting to open up. I'll be honest with you about this. I believe that one of the problems we have right now that we're facing, which is the most urgent problem that we face, is that we have to ask the humans alive on this planet to make sacrifices in their lifetime for an outcome that their children will not witness, their grandchildren will not witness, and if we are lucky, their great-grandchildren will witness. In other words, people have to believe and do things in their life now that will cause them hardship for people they do not even know will ever exist and cannot imagine, which means that they have to open up an idea of the future, which is quite different from the capacity of future holding, the channel, the dimensions, the length of the future that we currently are capable of holding. And since I've come to believe that the relationship, I think it's a commonplace, that the amount of future that you can hold in mind is intimately related to the amount of past that you can hold in mind. They kind of mirror each other. And that we have completely flattened our relationship to the past and sort of sanded it down to nothing. And we live in a completely present determined environment, it is extremely hard for us to awaken the kinds of imagination and that channel into a temporal action that is in the present, that has to be vectored towards something unimaginably far from us. And unless we can do that, I don't think that we can survive. It has nothing to do with the technology or with with the actions we take. We have to be able to imagine something, so that opening up the present tense and trying to lengthen the attention span is something that I'm committed to for myself as a practice. I used to play a game when I was a child. I grew up in Rome, and one of the things I used to really love to do is I would sit in any place in the city of Rome, and I would imagine the place where I was in the 19th century, and then in the 18th century, and then in the Middle Ages, and then in the Renaissance, and in the Middle Ages, and the early Middle Ages, and in the late Roman period, and the early Roman period, and then the Etruscan period, and like the Etruscans had vanished, like where'd they go? And then way below that, and then all of a sudden, when it was just nature before there was anybody there, and I would try to go up and down this scale and imagine it, and it was an extraordinary experience for me, because one could sit in almost any place in the city of Rome and feel this an unbelievable sense, and it was fantastically relativizing, because your own life felt like this tiny thing in relation to all these prior lives that you could summon in the kind of purgatorial way that poem about the soldiers summons, a sense of being part of this enormous community. And one of my first experiences about moving to the came out of moving to the United States. I was living in Iowa City, and I remember being pregnant and sitting in the room and thinking, I'm going to do that. I'm going to imagine what's the Civil War city underneath this one, and then of course the Indian settlement, and then the prairie. And so I thought, wow, being in America is having this sort of piece of human time, and then you encounter really very little history. You actually encounter nature. And then I would spend time in Wyoming, in a place that was spent many, many years in a place that was the actual first homesteaded place that people had ever been on in this piece of land, and the only people who had been there prior to the inhabitants from whom we had gotten the place were Native Americans who only summered up there from time to time while hunting. It wasn't a place where anyone had lived. So basically, geologic time was all that was underneath us. And it was extraordinary to feel this relationship of the self to geologic time, which came to feel like America to me, the sense that there was very little past underneath anything. And even living in Cambridge, Massachusetts now, where there's more past than in most places, there's still not, there's the past that we get to is a past of native peoples that we then, especially since they're primarily nomadic structures of existence, not in all parts of the country, of course. It's not the same thing as living in the midst of the Roman Forum. So that is a vertical model of which I would say, if you place it horizontally, you have an idea of the kind of memory span that I think we have to develop in order to cultivate a sense of the future in which we can posit and deposit our small actions, but very necessary actions at present. So these new poems for me have that kind of, that work of dilation.
I think we're gonna.
Okay, last one.
Last question. I've got a question about your evolution as a poet. Your early work the poems seem to be smaller and more sculpted, and throughout your career they seem to get bigger in terms of ideas and more language and sprawling over many pages. And I was wondering how you made that transition from small, very sculpted ones, where you kind of pared down to lift out ideas to ones where you stuck more and more in.
Well, in all fairness, I didn't pare those down. Those were as much as I could build up then. So I always built as big as I could, given the circumstances. And when I wrote my third book, my line lengthened. I mean, I've always felt that once I've written a book, the music, I have a whole book worth of poems that are poems after my first book and a whole book after the poems in my second book, a whole book of erosion poems, and I have as many self-portrait poems as there are in The End of Beauty, because, it's not like you stop writing the book and you know how to get out of that music and what information and what experience it can take you to. But I've always listened to Williams's admonition that a new music is a new mind, and I felt like I wanted to grow, and my life compelled me to grow anyway. And I never wanted to come to my death taken by surprise, so I wanted to try everything. And once I've written something out of a certain music, it is as far as I can go with that music. So I moved to different music. These new poems actually are the shortest poems I've written since that second book that you're referring to. And they run just a little bit over a page, and they're going to be a constant length, so throughout the book, and they're as long and as big as I can make them right now. I pare everything down and I build everything up. So when I was building the erosion poems, they were just everything I could put into them, and a lot of them are triptychs. A lot of them are actually quite long. The lines are short, but the most important poems in that book are 7-8 pages long. It's hard to notice that because the anthologies tend to pick the shorter ones because the royalties cost less. But even then, I was trying to make altarpieces, triptychs, things that I had experienced as a child. Looking at art, things that were in which simultaneity was an enormously important component. So poems like The Age of Reason, or In What Manner the Body is United with the Soul, or all those large triptychs in that book are themselves, I think, precursor poems for the later poems. Yes, thank you.